to understand the historical background of the Indian Constitution, we need to delve into the broader history of Indian struggle for independence from British colonial rule. Here is a summary of the key events leading to the drafting and adopting of the Constitution. So before 26 January 1949, many such acts and charters were passed by the British Parliament before the Constitution of India created by the Constituent Assembly of India, which can be called the basis of the Indian Constitution. These acts or charters can be placed in the hierarchical development of the Indian Constitution. The acts or charters passed by the British Parliament can basically be divided into two parts. First is to exercise effective control over the affairs of the East India Company, and secondly, to safeguard the interest of the empire. In this particular video, we will be covering the acts and charters made to establish effective control over the affairs of the East India Company. The history of the development of Indian Constitution begins with the establishment of the East India Company. So in this particular video, we'll see that how East India Company was incorporated in India, and we'll also cover the acts and regulations passed to establish effective control over the affairs of East India Company, which framed the present Indian Constitution. So let's start with the origin of the East India Company. The East India Company was established in 1600 in London, and then it was granted a royal charter by Queen Elizabeth. So charter means to give permission. It means after the establishment of East India Company, it was given an exclusive permission to trade in India by Queen Elizabeth. So the British Queen Elizabeth granted a royal charter of 1600. Through the royal charter of 1600, East India Company was incorporated, and East India Company had a monopoly to trade in Indian subcontinent. Monopoly means to have an exclusive right. So it was declared that the East India Company would be the only entity that would trade in subcontinent of India on behalf of the British. Now after the incorporation, all the members of East India Company incorporated a general code. Through this general code, court of directors were appointed, who used to see the management of the company. So in a conclusion, through the charter of 1600, East India Company was incorporated, and legislative powers were given to the company for the next 15 years. Now let's see what those legislative powers were. So the first was that the East India Company got authority to make laws for the better management of the company, and also they were authorized to punish its servants for the violation of these laws. Here you need to note that those legislative powers were given to the company only for the governance of the company and not for the whole British territory. So I hope it's clear that how East India Company incorporated in India. Initially, East India Company came to India merely as traders, but with the passage of time, the greed of powers and possessions forced them to conquer the whole India. And they started intruding into the administrative domain of the country. After defeating Siraj-ud-Dawla in the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Company's rule was established in the most densely populated area of India. So Company had established its centers in Madras and Surat. After that, Calcutta, Madras and Bombay became the chief settlement of the company. Now, in order to increase the legislative power of the company, came the Charter of 1661, by which more powers were given to the East India Company so that they could easily maintain discipline in the company. Through this charter, a governor and council were appointed for each settlement to try civil and criminal cases. Another important change was that they also got the legislative power over the entire British territory in India. And before that, legislative powers were given for the governance of the company only and not for the territory. After this act, since the employees of the company were so corrupt and the company was continuing with utmost corruption, because of which company was incurring loss, so due to concern over the East India Company's growing power and mismanagement, the British Parliament passed the Regulating Act of 1773. Now the name regulating itself will give you the idea of this act. So regulating means to have control. The main objective of this act was to regulate the affairs of the East India Company, for which following changes were made. So the very first important change was that the post of Governor of Bengal converted into Governor General of Bengal. Now here you're supposed to know that who was the first Governor General of Bengal. So it was Sir Warren Hastings. So the rule of Bengal was vested in the Governor General and a 4-member council, where 4-member councils were there to assist the Governor General. And it was also arranged that the decision of the council could be taken by majority. So this is how the Governor of Bombay and the Governor of Madras directly came under the control of the Governor General of Bengal. So both were now subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal. The next important change was that in the year of 1774, a Supreme Court was established in Calcutta, which was given exclusive authority in civil, criminal, naval, and religious matters. There was a Chief Justice and 3 additional judges in this court. So the first Chief Justice was Sir Elijah Impey. Apart from this, an appeal could also be made to the Privy Council in England against the decision of the Supreme Court. Another important change was that the term of the members of the Board of Directors of the company was reduced to 4 years. Apart from this, British Parliament decided that the charter will be renewed after every 20 years. So actually पहले कंपनी को जो 1600 का चार्टर मिला था, that charter was keep on going on. But now British Parliament had decided कि ये जो चार्टर है वो हर 20 साल में हम रिन्यू करेंगे. इसका मतलब अब 1773 के बाद अगला चार्टर आएगा 1793 में, और 1793 के बाद आएगा 1813 में, 1813 के बाद 1833 में, एंड 1833 के बाद आएगा 1853 में. So you don't have to mug up the entire Charter Act. Just keep on adding 20 in each. Moving forward, now before the Charter of 1793, an act came in the name after the British Prime Minister William Pitt, and the name of this act was Pitt's India Act 1784. Here you need to note that this is not a Charter Act. This act was passed in 1784 to serve the company's falling reputation due to the abnormalities of the Regulating Act, the incomplete control of the British government over the company, and the misrule of the company in India, and also against the injustice and atrocities being committed by its employees. So many provisions were made under this act. For instance, before this act, there was only one body in the company, and that was Board of Directors, which used to deal with both political affairs and commercial affairs, and they were not answerable to anyone. But after the coming of this act, another body was created, which was the Board of Control. Now the Board of Control will manage political affairs, and Court of Directors will manage commercial affairs. Here, British government was representing the Board of Control, and the East India Company was representing the Court of Directors. Means now through this act, only trade related rights were left with the East India Company. Another important change was that the members of the councils of the Governor Generals were reduced from 4 to 3. So far we have covered the incorporation of East India Company in 1600, Charter of 1661, the Regulating Act of 1773, and the Pitt's Act 1784. Rest we'll be covering in our next video. Otherwise, this very session will become lengthy and insipid. So thank you everyone. We'll see you in the next.